Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're discovering the perils of Michael Townley's deal with the FIB in Grand Theft Auto V. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. After pulling off the heist of the Evangelico jewelry store and paying back Martin Madrazo, Michael thought his life would be going back to normal, or whatever passes for normal for a washed-up, aging former thief who's pretending to be in witness protection. That thought would be turned on its head during a routine morning, though, as an old friend came walking through the door.
Yoga! Did someone say yoga?
Oh, hello, Fabian, darling.
Namaste.
Namaste.
No, not that old friend. That is Amanda's yoga instructor, who's definitely not taking the place of the tennis instructor we met back in episode 1. The friend I'm referring to is the guy he tried to have killed in the botched Cash Depot robbery 9 years ago, Trevor Phillips.
Yoga!
Somebody say yoga? Trevor? Michael.
The initial confrontation is tense to say the least, as Trevor can't believe his eyes. Michael is supposed to be dead, buried 6 feet under in a grave in North Yankton. But here he is in all his old glory, standing in the kitchen of the nicest house that Trevor has likely ever set foot in. As he's going around the room, saying hi to everyone, he notices one member of the Townley family is missing.
Where's Tracy?
Tracy was more or less a niece to Trevor, and he'd always imagined she'd grow up to do big things. But on this particular day, it sounds like she's gotten herself into some trouble. Jimmy has to think about it for a moment, but when he finally collects his thoughts, he remembers that she's gone down to the Maze Bank Arena to try out for a reality show called Fame or Shame. It's her favorite show, and she's dreamed of making it in front of the judges for ages. Though from the sound of how Michael talks, she's more likely to get laughed at than to actually make it big. Trevor insists that he and Michael head over to save her, and as they jump in the car, we'll take a minute to tear down reality TV. When most people think of reality TV, they probably think of shows like The Real World, Survivor, or American Idol. But the genre actually goes back as far as the 1940s, with the first iteration of the show Candid Camera. Something about seeing people in an unscripted or supposedly unscripted environment captivates audiences, and some shows, like the early 2000s hit American Idol, and others, allow people a chance at becoming famous in the blink of an eye. Personally, I was never really big into reality TV, as it seemed like nothing more than a gimmick. I prefer story-driven, written narratives where the whole thing is scripted and planned out, but that's just me. Millions of people around the country, and the world for that matter, share Tracy's obsession with these kinds of shows. For shows like American Idol back in the day, they would stand in line for hours just to get their chance to stand in front of judges who would decide if their voice or talent was good enough to make it on TV, even as their chances of being struck by lightning while standing in line were better than the chances of actually making it onto the show. And don't even get me started on how low their chances of winning were. And that was just the talent shows. Shows like Survivor pitted teams of people against each other on a desert island to see who would come out on top of a combination popularity and manipulation contest. You had to be physically capable of winning the challenges they put you in, while also being good at tricking people into not kicking you off when the time to vote someone out came. There were moments that made for some interesting TV, until you realize how much of it is staged or forced by the producers. Even shows that I kind of liked later on, like Hell's Kitchen, had an element of dramatic flair that just became predictable way too fast. If you knew what was likely to get people talking around the water cooler the morning after the show aired, you could pretty easily figure out what was going to happen before it happened. Of course, some of the popularity of these kinds of shows boils down to the ability to relate to the people on them. Unlike scripted shows where the talent was professional actors playing a role, the people on reality TV shows were average Joes for the most part. They could have been anyone's neighbor, coworker, friend, or family member, meaning the problems that they faced and the obstacles they had to overcome were relatable. Reality TV also fulfills our inherent need to gossip. There's been a lot of debate about the role that gossip plays in society and whether it has any potential benefits, but there's no denying that watching some of these shows drives talk about everything from love triangles to deception involving real people. It's true that some of these characters, for the lack of a better term, are playing things up for the camera. But there are also times where they might forget that they're being recorded and just act naturally, leading to some pretty embarrassing situations. And all of that makes for great TV and gives the people watching something to discuss with their friends as they take sides about who is right and who is wrong, who should be hooking up with who, or who performed better. And it's probably some combination of all of that that pulled Tracy into a show like Fame or Shame, drawing her to the auditions where she's preparing to show off for the cameras when her father and long-lost uncle come walking in to save her. She's flustered, but is able to recover enough to start dancing, and it isn't long before Michael and Trevor have to step in and stop the show thanks to the antics of the host, Laszlo. Laszlo is one of those guys that you just love to hate. He's got a very punchable face. He's a washed-up has-been who's riding the wave of popularity for the Fame or Shame show for all it's worth. And after a short chase through the streets of Los Santos, with Trevor and Michael following him in a stolen big rig, we get our chance at some kind of revenge for his mistreatment of Tracy. It's not the last we'll see of the rat, but it's the last that we'll see of him for a while. With that wrapped up, Michael and Trevor part ways for the moment, and Michael calls the one person he hopes can help him with this new turn of events: FIB Agent Dave Norton.
Dave,
We need to talk.
I was about to tell you the same thing.
Okay. Meet me at Galileo Observatory as soon as you can get there.
Dave Norton wasn't exactly a young man when he met Michael Townley, but his bust of Michael would set his career on a new path. Of course, that bust was mainly due to Michael turning himself in, and it didn't go exactly as planned since the most dangerous member of Michael's crew, Trevor Phillips, wound up getting away. For Michael's part, the deal worked out great though. He got a new life, a new last name, and a new house in the Vinewood Hills. Things weren't perfect for him, but he didn't really have much to worry about so long as he lay low and just kept paying Agent Norton monthly. Of course, Michael could only lay low for so long, with a temper like his, and it was only a matter of time before he landed himself in trouble. The situation with Martin Madrazo was the worst spat he'd apparently wound up in following his retirement, but it was probably not the only one, as we know of at least one other situation involving him forcing Franklin to drive through the window of a car dealership. But even with all of that, and the robbery of Angelico, Michael's actual worst nightmare was Trevor showing back up and being forced back into the life that he thought he'd left behind. Norton is just as concerned about Trevor being back in the picture as Michael is, but he has his own issues to worry about as his career is once again in jeopardy thanks to some nosy agents from another organization, the IAA. The two agents are fighting each other over a man named Ferdinand Karimov. He apparently has information that would bring down Norton and his superiors, and by extension Michael. The IAA says Karamov is dead, but they won't let anyone into the coroner's office to verify that, though Agent Norton has found a workaround to this problem. Norton knocks Michael unconscious and phones him in as a dead John Doe. This works to perfection, and Michael winds up waking up as a couple of coroners are getting ready to cut him open, resurrecting for the second time in his life and scaring the crap out of the men standing over him. They set off a security alarm, and all hell breaks loose. In the chaos, Michael's able to figure out that the body in the morgue isn't the man that Norton is looking for, and as he escapes, we can talk a little bit about the history of the real-life rivalry between the organizations parodied in the game, the FBI and the CIA. You might think that these real-world intelligence agencies would be natural allies, with the common goal of keeping the American people safe and each having their own jurisdiction. The reality of the situation, historically, isn't quite so simple though. Much like their fictional counterparts in GTA 5, the FBI and CIA have spent the majority of their existence working as rivals, even withholding information from each other that could have prevented tragedies like the September 11th terrorist attacks. And, like in the game, most of that rivalry boiled down to their annual budgets because, of course it did. See, from a budgetary standpoint, both government organizations and even private sector companies operate on some pretty tight constraints based on prior needs and projected shortfalls. To put it as simply as I can, if a government agency doesn't use all the money allotted to it in an annual budget, that money is reduced or removed in the next budget because it's assumed they don't need it as much for that particular thing. In theory, this makes sense because you don't want to keep pumping money into a project or department that doesn't need it when that money could be better used elsewhere. But in practice, this results in organizations wasting a ton of money to make sure they don't lose future allowances. I saw this firsthand, both when I was in the Army and then in a more corporate environment later in my career, as we were told in both instances by our superiors to either overorder things or to find ways to use more money near the end of the fiscal year on many occasions so we wouldn't lose any money in the upcoming budget. This is because it's easier to lose funding than to get it, and the higher-ups didn't want to have to try to justify an increase in the budget when they could just show that they'd used everything that they'd been given to show it was the right amount in the first place. Now, also in theory, the projections of what would be needed on a budget would help to make the decision more than past spending. But forecasting how much things are going to cost a year out is incredibly difficult to do, and companies and governments are often wrong in their estimations. Maybe an unforeseen natural disaster or global event causes the prices of something to go up unexpectedly. Or perhaps the people making the budget just underestimated the total cost of things like travel or materials. There are hundreds or potentially thousands of variables to consider when making a budget, and there is only so much money to go around. For the CIA and FBI, among other government agencies, this would ostensibly mean needing to not only justify their budget from the prior year, showing they needed all of the money they were given, but also justifying future funds at the expense of whatever other agencies they could take those funds from. The FBI might argue that they are seeing an increase in domestic threats, taking any incidents they could from the CIA, and the CIA would do the same on their end. The more work they have, the more money they need. And that's not even getting into the hubris of agents who are trying to climb the ladder and make a name for themselves within each organization. These would be people who want their name in the paper as much as possible, to claim as many awards and decorations as they can, because to them it's more about beating everyone else than about saving lives and making the world safer. In the GTA 5 world, This plays out in a number of ways, as the whole fight between the IAA and the FIB over this guy Karamov would likely boil down to a combination of the individual agents wanting to one-up each other and to steal money from the other's budget. If the IAA can get information from the man that brings down a bunch of people in the FIB, they could snag some of the FIB's budget for themselves and gain some notoriety. Getting back to the game, Michael manages to escape the morgue before meeting with Franklin to let him know just what kind of trouble he can expect if he plans to stick around. While most people might run for the hills upon hearing that the person they're working with has close ties to the FIB and a madman like Trevor, Franklin doubles down and seals his fate in the coming storm. A day or two after basically being tasked as an undercover agent by the FIB, Michael meets with his new handlers, including not only Agent Norton, but also his boss, a man named Steven Haines. Agent Haines is a lot more rough around the edges, to say the least, and he takes what little power he has way too seriously. He's also very focused on doing things to advance his career, putting him squarely into the hole that we talked about earlier, and he goes so far as to say that our assistance with whatever he needs done directly impacts him professionally. But what exactly is that he needs done? Climbing in a car with Agent Norton, he instructs us to call in Franklin and Trevor to help break the target witness out of IAA custody. The call to Franklin is easy enough, but since we all know that Trevor isn't going to go along with the plan, he's already been picked up. The plan seems pretty simple, and yet somehow super crazy. Trevor is going to fly a helicopter over the IAA building in downtown Los Santos. Michael is going to rappel down from it and break into the room where they're interrogating Karamov and snatch him out. And Franklin is going to provide cover fire from another building. Not only is this plan absolutely off the rails, it wouldn't really be possible, as high-security government buildings like this would have some pretty strict no-fly rules around them, and the helicopter would be shot down the minute it got within a mile of the tower. That might be a little bit of an overstatement, but it isn't too far off, as the government doesn't really mess around when it comes to securing places like this. The mission itself is a lot of fun, if not entirely realistic, and we do manage to get away with the target, though there is a major point of discussion between this mission and the next one, as rescuing Karamov from the IAA lands him in FIB custody and brings us to the most infamous scene in the game. Now, YouTube has some pretty strict rules about what can and can't be shown on the platform, and I need all the ad revenue I can get at the moment, so I have to be careful with how we show and discuss this next part, because I could very easily walk too close to the line in the terms of service. That being said, the FIB, like the IAA, has some less than ideal methods of trying to extract the information that they want from Mr. Karamov. When we first find him in the IAA building, he's being beaten and harassed in ways that are more in line with methods that might be used by a sadist. Now, in FIB custody, the pressure is turned up to 11 as Trevor is tasked with outright torturing the man using car batteries and other tools meant to bring as much pain as possible. We've talked in previous videos about the efficacy of torture, as this isn't the first time that we've seen it happen in a game, though this is the first time that it's been unavoidable. For starters, numerous studies have shown that the use of torture to gather information or intelligence isn't useful. People will lie to make the pain stop, or will tell the person harming them whatever they want to hear, even if they aren't lying on purpose. One study on the topic, undertaken by Shannon Houck and Lucian Conway in 2015, used a group of willing participants to test the likelihood that individuals being subjected to pain would divulge information or lie about it. The test involved one participant submerging their hand in cold water, ranging from 1 to 10 degrees Celsius, while the other tried to guess the location of a marble the participant with their hand in the water hid somewhere in the room. Overall, the experiment showed that there was an increased likelihood of deception at higher levels of pain, as participants would get a break from the cold water when they lied about the location of the marble. Though, more research does need to be done to build on the results. But just because people would be more likely to lie to make the pain stop, that doesn't mean that they would always lie. And as we discussed in the video about Abel in Telltale Games The Walking Dead Season 4, the methods used to get the information could be justified depending on the urgency and the nature of the threat. For instance, if you know for sure that someone has information on a plot that is going to result in the death of a large group of people, it might be easier to justify harming them to get the information, if there is no other alternative, as from a utilitarian perspective, it's morally better to provide a little pain in order to prevent a larger amount of harm. That being said, in the situation with Karamov in GTA 5, we don't really know much about the reasons for his torture. And the most that we can glean from the way the agents talk, there is some kind of supposed terrorist plot to thwart. The details are sketchy at best, and it's annoying how they speak in riddles with us, to say the least. But that's not abnormal for federal agents, as we've seen time and time again throughout history how the government uses the fallback of terrorism to explain away just about everything. Especially since September 11, 2001, they've been cagey about things and often publicly state that this bust or that bust stopped some kind of massive plot, or that one action or another was justified in the name of national security. And one of the biggest debates in politics has been how much information should be divulged to the public and how much needs to be kept under wraps to protect the public at large. On the one hand, it could be argued that the methods and intelligence used to root out potential threats needs to be protected, as bad actors could exploit loopholes in the process for their own gain. But on the other, it could also be said that some of the tactics used might not be worth the human cost. After all, what's stopping the government from picking up any person they want at any time under the guise of national security and doing whatever they please to that person, even if they know nothing? In the best case, the people in charge of things wouldn't abuse their power and wouldn't do any more harm than was necessary. But what happens when the people in power don't care about norms, the rule of law, or treating human beings with the respect and dignity they deserve? Back in the game, Trevor's interrogation of Karamov gets a description of the guy the FIB wants to target, and Michael pulls the trigger on what he's told is a threat to national security. The whole situation is about as messy as it could be, but we also get a glimpse of Trevor that is often overlooked, as he refuses the orders of Agent Haines and takes Karamov to the airport instead of killing him. Some of this could be Trevor just sticking it to the man, as it were, but he seems a little conflicted about the whole situation. He didn't really want to torture Karamov, but he didn't really have the option to refuse. This isn't because he's against torture inherently, as he says on the way to the airport that he's fine with it as a pastime, but more because he recognizes the circumstances aren't right. He doesn't think the government should be using it as a means to an end, and he doesn't like that he was used as a tool in this instance. But this won't be the last time Trevor will be used by the FIB as a means to an end, as he teams up with Michael and Franklin once more and gets involved with someone who seems to be involved in a lot more than he should be: Devin Weston. Meeting up once more, the trio of Michael, Trevor, and Franklin are tasked by agents Norton and Haines to steal some drug money from the IAA. This is apparently asset forfeiture money that they've confiscated that the FBI thinks would be put to better use in their hands. Now, asset forfeiture itself is a controversial topic, to put it lightly. Many government agencies, from local police stations all the way up to the highest federal authorities, have been known to seize assets they deem as being used for criminal purposes with the intent of using those assets themselves. Everything from vehicles and property to cash can be seized, and the laws around this practice are lax at best in most cases. In many states, the local, state, or federal government can come in and seize any assets they deem as being used for criminal purposes, and they can sell or repurpose those assets for their own gain, often without even convicting the person they took the assets from of a crime. Now, in some cases, this kind of makes sense, as the money or other assets being used for criminal purposes needs to go somewhere. Taking those assets and using them to benefit society by helping to fund programs and agencies tasked with keeping the public safe seems like a no-brainer. On the other hand, allowing assets to be taken and repurposed incentivizes agencies to find a reason to take those assets in the first place, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. If they can just claim that anything they want to have was being used in some kind of criminal activity and then seize that thing, why wouldn't they? In reality, there needs to be some pretty strong controls around what can be seized and a high standard of evidence to be met before it can be used. Some states have banned the practice of civil asset forfeiture without a criminal conviction outright, but it's still allowed at the federal level, and something called equitable sharing, the requirement for assets seized by federal authorities to be shared between state and federal agencies, works as a loophole in states where the practice is disallowed. Of course, here in Los Santos, we're dealing with federal agencies, and we're walking into another heist as Michael, Franklin, and Trevor work together on the setup. It's a pretty basic heist, and they only really need a few things: a trash truck, a tow truck, a getaway vehicle, boiler suits, and some masks to hide their identity. Once all of that is secured, Agent Haines instructs Michael to carry out the job and deliver the money to a man that we briefly met earlier before the whole torture scene, Devin Weston. Devin is apparently pretty well connected, with a lot of friends in high places and some good investment contacts. And after stealing the money and getting away from the hordes of police that show up, Michael meets him at his house in the Vinewood Hills to drop off the funds. He seems like nothing more than just a rich prick who's used to getting what he wants when he wants. But he catches Michael's attention when he mentions that he can hook him up with the famous movie producer Solomon Richards. This, of course, ropes Michael in. But there's a catch. Devin wants Michael and his crew to steal some cars for him, some very expensive and rare cars. And as exciting as that prospect is, we've got something else to take care of first, as next week Michael learns just how much getting back into his old ways is going to cost him, and Trevor takes advantage of Wade's cousin's hospitality. To make sure you don't miss out on that and all the other videos I release here on Lost in Games, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I drop new philosophy and ethics in games videos each week on Thursday, and you aren't going to want to miss what I've got coming up as the year goes on. If you want to get your name on the screen while helping the channel out in other ways, I've got channel memberships, a Patreon, and a subscription plan on my website that will all help towards buying new games and storage space so I can keep covering everything that you all want to see down the road. That's all I've got for now. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.